Hello and good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me this evening as we are going to take a look at how to do an effective value chain analysis for service-based businesses. We're going to be primarily focused on law firms and the operational processes therein, so case flows and things like that. But what we're going to take a look at today is also broadly applicable for other service-based businesses as well, as long as you're operating a business where your costs of goods sold are pretty much minimal and your headcount, your operational budget, your marketing budgets are your primary expenses. So let's get started. So in this video, we are going to cover a few things today, and effectively you can think of this as a recipe for understanding your current processes and how we can make them better. We're going to start out by mapping what actually happens in your cases, not what you think happens, but what really happens. This may require some input from other members on your team, particularly if you have multiple attorneys, paralegals, etc. But we're really going to want to try and dig into not just the ideal state, but the true state of your business. And then we will work on finding the pain points, figuring out how much they're costing you, either in time or in eventually putting a dollar amount to that as well, and then work on creating better systems. And then, perhaps most importantly, we're going to talk about how to measure whether those improvements are working, and if not, how to adjust them so that they can provide additional value and become sustainable in the long run. So, why this matters now? I mean, obviously we all want to make more money, but as we move into an increasingly digital age, which frankly I could be saying at any point in the last 20 years, but as we think about, where we are now, where we've come from and where we're going, marketing has become ever more important. The work that we do has changed from something that, people place attorneys in, our clients place attorneys in a inherent state of trust, to something that is, a little bit more of a transactional client relationship where they do have expectations about turnaround times and everything else, either because they've worked with other attorneys before, or they've seen commercials, or they just have realized that because of the internet, everything can be done faster, and therefore legal problems should be resolved faster as well. And as a result, people who became lawyers to practice law find that instead they're just managing chaos. But if you're like most law firm owners or managing attorneys or anything else, you have found yourself spending more time putting out fires and not enough time on the legal work. But the good news is that most of these problems aren't people problems. They're more system problems, process problems, things that can be controlled and mitigated against. Hopefully these shadows aren't getting very distracting, but they are a little bit distracting to me. Unfortunately, I only have so many lighting options. So here, let me make it bigger, and that'll make it so much more fun. But the problem is cases are taking longer than they should. Team members are constantly asking what's next. You're getting clients that are complaining or otherwise frustrated with what they perceive to be communication gaps, even if they're just thinking, oh, well, there's, I haven't heard anything for weeks. Well, that's because, especially if you're in something like immigration, there's no news. USCIS takes forever, or family law. We don't have a court date, or we're waiting on a court date, or we have a court date, but it's 2 months from now. But system problems do ultimately resolve themselves with better processes, because when you have predictable workflows, everybody knows what to do, cases are going to move smoothly, and you're going to find that you can get your professional life back and really start working on moving the business forward, rather than running around chasing all of your attorneys like they're either chickens with their heads cut off or you're a chicken with your head cut off. So the solution to all of this is having those predictable processes that work without your constant oversight, rather than you feeling like you're micromanaging your team, or the team members are constantly coming to ask, okay, well, what do we do now? You'd think they'd think critically, you'd think they'd figure it out for themselves, but not always the case. So we are going to walk through 8 specific steps, and the key to understand is that this is a systematic approach. We're not just going to randomly try and fix things. We're going to sit down, we are going to map who does what, we're going to track the handoff points. We're going to find out which of those handoff points are creating chaos. Then we're going to figure out, what's the real cost of this chaos. We're going to redesign, hopefully incrementally, but sometimes there will be a need for more comprehensive redesign, but designed to make our systems simple. Then we're going to try and test these with real cases, either ones that have recently concluded or ones that we have in process currently. We're going to measure our success and then figure out how we can roll out what has worked across our entire organization. And then step 9, it's not in here, but is to, rinse and repeat, do it over and over again until we've got things running as smoothly as, to pull a quote from down Periscope, a Swiss car. Once I can figure out where to click, we'll go to the next slide. So step 1, we want to just start with picking one type of case. Whatever case you handle most frequently, if you're in multiple practice areas, or even if you're in one practice area but handle more than one kind of case. It could be, if you a full general practitioner, could be PI, could be divorce, whatever you do most often. If you are, a little bit more specific, estate planning, family law, etc., pick whatever is the lion's share of your time spent within the firm or the lion's share of your revenue generation. So the next thing you're going to want to do, and I should have put animations in this slide, but for each or any of these slides for that matter, for each team member, you're going to want to document, and this is going to be everybody from sales or intake to client care or client support if you have somebody in that role, or it could be the paralegal, whoever does the file opening after sales and intake, going to be the attorney, anybody else who is going to touch that case over its life cycle, and map out for each team member what that individual is doing, how long it's going to take them, and when they are going to do it. This is where, if this was a seminar, I would pause and say, okay, let's take 5 minutes or 10 minutes to write out all of this. But because this is a YouTube video, you can just pause me and wait for me to come back. So I'm going to keep talking. This might seem like kind of the obvious step, but at the same time, more often than not, you're going to find that you're a little surprised by what you discover, and this is where you're going to need input from your team. But most people that own their own firms and are now a little bit more hands-off from the business think that they know how the cases are flowing through their office, but when you actually go through and map it out, there's going to be a lot of duplication of efforts, there's going to be unnecessary steps, or there's going to be gaps where some of the important things, like client contact, don't happen at all. So the red flag that we want to look for here is either the same task being done by multiple people or work bouncing back and forth between different individuals unnecessarily. Admittedly, there is some need for a back and forth, but we want to keep that to a minimum because that creates the opportunity for miscommunication. That creates the opportunity for people to, just push it onto their ever-growing pile of things that, I've got to get that done eventually. And then sometimes you get a client that calls in because they haven't heard from you guys in 4, 6, 8 weeks. And they're like, hey, what's happened to my case? It was with somebody. I don't know. It's the end of a long day. I'm being very glib. But as an example, looking at like a very simple divorce for a family law case, we can have something like client support staff starts. They do the initial consultation scheduling. That takes 15 to 20 minutes just to gather the initial information from the prospective client, connect the basic family information if they're also supporting the consult. I'm a big fan of the sort of what I call the dentist model, where you have a non-attorney do the majority of even a sales consult. The attorney comes in for 10, 15 minutes, same way the dentist does. The hygienist does all the cleaning. Dentist comes in, 10, 15 minutes, tells you haven't flossed enough, even if you're murdering your gums with floss every day. Tells you to, make sure you're brushing your teeth, you don't have any cavities, come back in 6 months and we'll bill you again. I'm not a big fan of the dentist. And then you can also have, you've got the client support staff also doing the explanation of the document requirements. Meanwhile, paralegal, doing financial disclosure preparation, that's about 3 hours. Discovery requests and responses, 2.5. And court filing coordination is about 1.5. This is laid out in a nonlinear format just for ease of reading, but you would want to, if you're doing this on paper, map it out step by step with the task, the time included, and who's responsible. And then the primary attorney is spending about an hour in the initial consult or preparing for it. I did not include the dentist model in here because, frankly, it's a little hard to explain on a slideshow, but another hour or so doing strategy planning and case assessment, and then about maybe 4 hours in court and doing depositions. Yes, this is gross oversimplification for something as complex as divorce, but just to give you an idea of what that first step would look like. In this, you'll kind of notice how the attorney's time is heavily weighted towards the hearings and the depositions. The paralegal is handling most of the document-intensive work. This is the right way to do it. Delegate as much to your paralegals as you can. They bill at lower rates, and this will give you your baseline data on how to spot problems. For instance, if your paralegal is spending 5 hours on financial disclosures while your baseline is saying that it should take 3 hours, you might either need better client preparation or standardized forms to help streamline the process, or you may need a new paralegal. We try not to, jump right to that conclusion, but sometimes that is the case. It's that the person's just not working efficiently, or you may just need to provide them with some additional training about how to work more efficiently. That would be the first step before getting rid of them. Alternately, if we're looking at something a little bit more complex, but we're still going to grossly oversimplify this, but a probate case for an estate planning firm, which does show a very different pattern from the family law case. In this, you've got the client support staff doing the initial family contact and the intake, about 45 minutes, so more time involved there, as well as an additional hour for gathering basic information about the estate. Probate, a little bit more complicated than doing a simple estate plan, obviously because somebody's already dead. And then coordinating with the funeral home and the family could be 30 minutes. It could be 2 hours. It really depends on how involved the case is. You will want to build in a little bit of fungibility to make sure that you are providing enough grace to acknowledge that cases are not always as simple as they seem or, as we'd like them to be. We've got the primary attorney spending, probably an hour and a half on the strategy session and a state assessment. Some of that'll be time with clients. Some of that'll be time in the back office. Court appearances and hearings, I gave 3 hours. It could be 3 hours. It could be 30 hours. Again, this one's going to be really variable based on the complexity of the estate. And then meetings with beneficiaries and doing the distributions could be about 2 hours. Paralegal is going to spend a lot more time, again, on the document collection, the drafting, asset inventory, things like that, letting creditors know. They're still going to carry the majority of the burden here, but it is going to be a little bit more of an equitable split than it would be if you were just doing a will and trust or something like that. But again, the attorney's time is going to be focused on court appearances and beneficiary relations. The paralegal is still carrying most of the workload because it's document-intensive work, but it can be systematized effectively. There are many wonderful softwares out there that can really cut down on all these times, but I didn't want to necessarily include those and give anybody, false expectations that, this, entire probate process can be done in 3 hours in aggregate. But if there are any specific, and of course the legal assistant doing court filing, state asset management, and the primary communication with the beneficiaries so that the attorney isn't spending time just, sending emails and making phone calls that could be done by someone else. But yeah, if your probate cases, or if any of your cases are taking significantly longer in any category, this is going to be your first flag for where you want to focus your process improvements and possibly your training exercises as well. So step 2, maybe 2 examples for that one, but step 2, you're going to want to track the handoffs. This is where you're going to really draw out that map and determine how many times is work being passed between people. This is also the problem with me creating this content and then leaving it for a couple of weeks because I told you to do that in part of step 1. You're going to do it in step 2. I apologize. I will get better at these as we go. But you want to make sure that you're identifying the spaces between people, because this is where a lot of cases get stuck. Work gets finished by one person and then ends up sitting on someone else's desk for weeks, days, hours, or hours, days, and weeks. And sometimes there's also just failures in communication. Important information doesn't get communicated during the handoff, especially if it's something that happens, maybe late on a Friday and somebody else gets it on Monday. And then, maybe there's some piece of nuance that has been forgotten and passed along or hasn't been passed along that is critical to the case. So start really working on paying attention to how long work sits between people. If you've got, let's say, a paralegal that has finished a medical records request, more of a PI example, but the attorney isn't getting to it until, they finished a records request on Monday, but the attorney hasn't gotten to it until maybe Thursday, that's a 3-day delay that is probably unnecessary. Yes, sometimes, the calendars fill up and it takes you a little while to get to things, but it's a 3-day delay that's probably unnecessary and has a chance to create those missed deadlines, those information gaps, and ultimately creates disappointed clients, which impacts your Google reviews. It increases the likelihood that somebody's going to fire you. It increases the likelihood that they're not going to refer other people to you because they've had a less than delightful experience. And then what you're going to want to do is calculate those handoff delays. So, to use an example, if we take a typical handoff pattern of sales and intake, or sales or intake to the primary attorney, sales and intake has completed the intake forms and the client info. They should conduct the handoff within 24 hours of the initial call. And then the wait time is usually 2 or 3 days until the attorney reviews. And then the primary attorney, once he's gotten that review done, or she has gotten that review done, has to do some handoff to the paralegal. They do case strategy notes in the task list, and then they send it over to the paralegal after the intake and the case strategy meeting. And then you've got, another 1 or 2 days to wait time, sometimes longer, if the attorneys are spending time in court, or if they are, have a full calendar of consults to do in a day or things like that. And then you now all of a sudden have 3 to 5 days with no progress on your case that you just signed up. And if you're, not a PI attorney or another contingency firm, this person probably just paid you a good bit of money, and then they had to wait a week for any work to really start on the case. And when you then go and multiply that by dozens of cases, you can see why clients are starting to get frustrated and feel like cases are taking longer than they should. The fix here isn't necessarily to eliminate all of the waiting time, because that's fundamentally impossible until AI comes and takes all of our jobs, but it is to make it more predictable. It's to make it shorter, and then also to make it something that can be communicated, because if it's predictable, we know how long it's probably going to take, and we can say, okay, this has been done. We will reach out to you with next steps or with additional questions in 3 days, 5 days, 7 days. It doesn't actually matter as long as you set those expectations and can hold yourselves to them, or ideally use the Montgomery Scott School of Time Management and manage to get things done in 5 days when you tell them that it's going to take 7 or 4 hours to fix the dilithium crystals, and it actually is only going to take you 2. You can always provide a more delightful experience than you would otherwise. So, step 3 is in finding your chaos points. So these are the places where your process regularly breaks down. Every firm's chaos points and breakdown points are going to be different, but communication breakdowns are the most common, where you have people doing the same work twice, or important tasks that aren't getting done because everybody just thinks, oh, someone else is handling that. Does that sound familiar to anybody? I know this isn't live, so I can't, wait for a show of hands or anything, but drop a comment or something. Conversely, you can also end up with bottlenecks, which happen when there's too much work funneling through just one person. I've seen this happen most frequently. I mean, attorneys are obviously the easiest bottleneck to occur, because especially if you're in a smaller firm where you're maybe the only attorney, or you have a baby attorney or an associate, but you still handle most of the work, people are going to be waiting on you, and then they're going to be idle while the work piles up elsewhere, either on your desk or behind you or in front of you. This is also where frequently we'll see quality control issues happen, because if you are overloaded and trying to not be the bottleneck, you're less likely to catch mistakes as you go through the work, and then the person who catches the mistake is probably going to be the client, or God forbid, the judge. And then we're all in a world of unhappiness, bad Google reviews, fired clients, possibly malpractice lawsuits, and a partridge in a flaming pear tree. So now that we've kind of worked through the first 3 steps of the process, It's time to take those bottlenecks, those pain points that we've identified, and put some numbers to these problems. Pause for a sip of cough syrup. Most attorneys that I've seen know that they have inefficiencies. Like, clearly things are not all working as perfectly as they should, but they're a little bit blind to the actual cost of all these inefficiencies. Because if you go through and actually calculate the time cost, including everyone's time, not just those who have, a billable rate and billable hour requirements, but all the other things that get involved, the non-billable support staff, as well as the time that gets spent fixing the problems and managing the chaos, it really starts to add up. And then, client impact is a little bit harder to measure, but it is very real because unhappy clients don't refer new business. And then ultimately, if the business is not doing well, or if there's a lot of rework necessary, you're also going to see, a cost to your team morale, because staff are going to feel frustrated. They're going to start to look for new opportunities where maybe they think that the grass will be greener on the other side. And when you have higher turnover, then obviously that contributes to greater inefficiencies, lower client satisfaction scores, and it becomes sort of a downward spiraling, to use a biology term, positive feedback loop, where things continue to build on each other, and it's that sort of snowball effect. And ultimately, team morale does affect everything, not only just turnover, but their willingness to work overtime to get things across the board, or across the line when things really need to get done, and the quality of the work itself. All of things, again, which have negative impacts on your business in the long run. So, for an example of how to calculate the cost, if, let's say, we are in the EP world and we have to do revisions on, let's say, a will or a trust because of unclear client objectives, which is a very easy one to have happen. And it's an easy one to say, it's not really our fault. The client didn't tell us what they wanted the first time, or they changed their mind. Yeah, that's understandable, but it's also something that we can exert some measure of control over. It's not going to be, something that we can completely eliminate, but look at the time impact. The attorney's going to have to spend 2 hours per case, doing some of the redrafting. More of this should be on the paralegal, but I've seen a lot of instances where the attorneys are spending time drafting documents, or especially if they have to make revisions, doing the redrafting. Paralegals got an hour and a half for reformatting and coordination between the client and the attorney. And this can add, you're not going to work only on one matter at a time. This can add, 2 weeks to each of your cases, just in the time on desk and getting them across the line. And if you look at, if you only do 75 estate plans per year, which is not a large practice at all, but if you're having to revise 75 estate plans per year, 75 times 2 gives you 150 hours for the attorney. If you bill them nominally at $300 an hour, that's $45,000. And if the paralegal's having to do 112 and a half hours worth of rework at $40 an hour, and frankly, that's probably lower than it should be. So let's say screw that and bring it up to $100 an hour. That's $11,000. So here I've got it at 49,500. But if you really take that up and make it a little bit more realistic, you're looking at almost $56,000 in rework cost, just because you didn't ask the client enough questions. And I think that, $60,000, that's enough money to hire a dedicated intake specialist to do more thorough initial consultations, or you could also consider investing in better client education materials up front so that they know more of what they should be planning for. And then when they do come to the consult, if you combine that with a more thorough checklist or a more thorough intake process, you can eliminate, again, you're not going to be able to get rid of all 75 of these reworks, but if you can get rid of 70 of them, the 5 will be a lot easier to absorb into the cost structure than than 75, because now you're talking about a few $1,000s worth of rework instead of $60,000 worth of rework, and your clients will be happier and you'll get more referrals. So step 5 from all of this is to, once we've identified what's costing us the most time, once we've identified those pain points, once we've identified the handoffs, once we've identified the actual tasks that are being assigned to everybody, we're going to want to do the rework and design better systems. Ideally, simpler systems, because the key word here is simple. If your new process requires a PhD or a JD to understand, it's just not going to work, because frankly, if we only hired JDs, then we'd be a very overpriced law firm. Good systems are very clear about who does what, when they do it, and how they communicate about it. This is, just started from an example because I think that this aspect is really most easily taught from an example. But note that this is a very specific example. It tells people exactly what to include, when to do it, and how to communicate when things are completed. There's no guesswork. There's very little ambiguity, and some additional detail may be required. Again, I'm simplifying things to fit them on a single PowerPoint slide without just providing you with a whole lot of word salad. But as you go through and develop these things, you'll want to seek feedback from the other people who will be involved in the process, and find out if they do need more clarity, and ask them to try and approach things from an outside perspective, not just knowing all of the things that already go into the work, but taking a moment to step outside of themselves and think about, maybe right when they first joined the firm, would they have been able to follow this? Because the key underlying concept here is that you want to make it simple enough that anybody can basically pick it up and at least muddle their way through. As you pick up more nuance, it'll obviously become easier and more efficient, but somebody that you basically pull off the street that knows how to do basic computer tasks and filing could be given the sort of process and follow along with it enough that they're not going to get completely lost. So you want to keep it simple enough that anybody can follow it, but detailed enough to prevent them just being, the endless questioning asshole to try and get all the nuance that they need. So step 5 is this. I may have added an additional step in here. No, this is also part of step 5. Never mind. So step 5 is creating task ownership charts, because this is a way that we can help eliminate the "I thought you were doing that" problem. Each important task can be given a clear owner, a clear deadline, and clear communication requirements. On the deadlines, you do want to provide something that is an evergreen deadline. So here we've got within 10 days of document signing, rather than by August 31st, which would be 10 days from when I'm recording this. But you want to always provide those clear deadline and then clear communication requirements about how things should be communicated. Here we've got an estate planning example that shows how trust funding, which is often the most delayed part of EP, notwithstanding the juggling of court things in probate, but it shows how you can add pretty clear accountability in managing trust funding. This isn't about micromanaging how people are doing their work, because you still want to allow people enough flexibility that they feel like they are able to provide value in their own individual idiom. But it's more about clarifying who's responsible and when things should be or need to be done, depending on their urgency. Because when everybody knows the expectations that are set out for them, you will get fewer surprises, you will get less chaos, and you will get more efficient work from your team. I'm very fond of saying that it is absolutely remarkable what people will put up with when the expectations are set out that they will be expected to put up with something ahead of time. Kind of the Actually, no, that metaphor doesn't work. I was going to say it's kind of like the frog in the boiling water. If you drop the frog in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put the frog in the boiling water or the cool water and raise the temperature, it won't. But and that kind of works. But it's more of, if you make sure that you provide people with the understanding that these are the things that we're going to be expected of you, they'll prepare themselves for those expectations. And then you just have to make sure you follow through, because if you set them out for an expectation of a high-paced environment, and then they come in and it's, pretty lackadaisical, when the time comes that you do actually move back to a high-paced environment, they're going to be absolutely blindsided and not sure what they signed up for. So, step 6, once we've gone through and done steps 1 through 5, we've created our task charts, we've created everything else, we want to dip our feet in the water of implementation, because we don't want to just dive in straight with our new process and say, oh, well, I hope it works out okay. But step 6 is instead about testing before you commit, because if you roll things out to the entire practice at once, you're just going to create more confusion. People are going to be upset. Clients are going to be upset because so many things have changed all at once and they don't know what's going on. So don't roll out new systems to your entire practice area at once. Pick a few cases, new cases, or if you can kind of do a post-mortem on ones that have just occurred. But ideally, you'll pick 2 or 3 new cases, especially ones that are maybe a little simpler, and run them through with this new process that you've created to try and eliminate those pain points, and make sure that you are tracking everything. Track whether handoffs happen on time. Track whether there's less confusion, both internally and externally. Track whether clients are happier. Externally, the clients being happier, that'll show whether or not there's less confusion. But do this for about a month. Have those weekly systems checks as you're going through. Meet with your team. Ask every Friday, what on these cases that we're working with the new system, what worked well this week? Where were there misses? Where did the system break down? And how can we adjust it to make it better? And then, after a month or so, make adjustments as you go. Most systems will need tweaking after you see how they work in practice, and then work towards rolling it out to the entire practice after you're able to go through a couple iterations of step 6 of testing your systems and making sure that these things do work. But fundamentally, don't try to fix everything all at once. Find those really key pain points that are costing you the most money, work on those first, and then loop back around, start back at step 1 or step 3, and then just slowly iterate on them. I would suggest, working through, so like kind of looping back around and starting at step 2, step 3, until you've got one case type, one matter type really down pat. Then you can move on to the next one. And that's why it's most important to start with, what's really your bread and butter, because that's where you're going to create the most impact in the medium term. Step 7 is going to be about measuring your success. And I kind of alluded to this in the last one, but these are some of the numbers that you want to track, because you need to know whether or not your improvements are working. If they're not working, you need to go back to like step 4, step 5 and figure out, okay, what assumptions did we have that were wrong that are causing us to focus on things that aren't moving that needle? Some of these metrics will be very easy to track. Days per case or hours per case. So average days per case is going to be average days from intake to case completion, time on desk. Your CRM should be able to track this for you. Average attorney hours by case type. If your attorneys are not billable, if you work on a flat fee basis, your attorneys should still have billable requirements, and they should still track the hours that they are spending on each case. Looking at you in particular, my estate planning attorneys, because if they're taking 6 hours of work to do a will that should be able to be drafted, reviewed, and sent out in half the time, even if they're still meeting their nominal deadlines, they're working way too hard on something that should not be taking them that much time. Some of the other things will require a little bit more effort. Internal revisions per case isn't usually going to be tracked super easily, but it is something that, if you're using Google Docs or Microsoft Word, you can keep track of, and then you can also make notes in your CRM. You'll also have to ask, some of these quality metrics. They are inherently qualitative rather than quantitative. They will also be a little more difficult to track, but you'll have to ask your team members, about their stress levels. You'll have to ask them to track if client complaints come in, things like that. But no matter what it is, measurement is absolutely critical, because without it, you're just kind of feeling around in the dark and guessing about whether or not things are getting better. And I mean, there is value in a more qualitative gut check on, does this feel like it's going to work better? But ultimately, we're in this business to make money, and we can't eat our feelings. So we do want to make sure that we are measuring our success or our failures, because if we measure our failures, we can figure out, where those failures were, learn from them. Then they're not failures, they're just mistakes. And then step 8, we want to roll out what works. When a system proves successful, when certain elements of that system prove successful, we want to take those, run with them, and then obviously integrate all the other things that we can learn. But the final step is ultimately scaling up what works. When you've tested your system, you've tested these improvements, and it's working well, make sure that you document it, and document it clearly so that anyone can follow it. Write down exactly how it works. Make sure that new hires can follow it. Make sure that people that have been doing it for 20 years can follow it and adhere to it, rather than whatever perverse way they've come up with as their way of working, as I think most of us end up doing after a few years in the same role. And then make sure that you train your team not just on their role. I know I'm saying you make sure that every team member knows their role, and that's obviously the first step, but also make sure that they understand how their work fits into the bigger picture, because that will also provide them with the context and the broader perspective on, if something does go wrong, they aren't just stuck saying, well, this is broken, I don't know how to fix it, and I'm going to sit here until somebody comes along and tells me how to fix it. They understand the bigger picture, and then that will provide them, hopefully, with the perspective to be able to go and find the person that either worked on the process before them or worked on it after them, and say, help me connect the dots. Yes, collect the dots. That's exactly what we should be doing. Well, how can we connect the dots to make sure that we do get this thing rolling again? Make the new process your standard operating procedure. Say, especially to those people that have been doing it in their own way for a while, like, no, this is how we're doing things now. It may feel a little bit more inefficient for some of those old campaigners in the short term, but ultimately it's going to make a big difference in the long run, because there is standardization. There's understanding of how things are done. The reason that Henry Ford was able to make such a huge impact on the world's mobility is because the Model T was built to a standard. The reason that Ray Kroc was able to bring McDonald's to the world was because it was consistent every time. Love or hate McDonald's, I personally don't really like it very much, but it tastes the same whether you're in Hong Kong or Hanoi, or actually I don't know if they have them in Hanoi, but whether you're in Hong Kong or in Hamburg or in, I can't think of anywhere, in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. There we go. But make the new process your standard operating procedure, and then keep the improvement process going with regular check-ins with your team to find out what's working, what's not, and always kind of have that iteration, that continuous improvement mindset, so that you can find out what works, what doesn't, and always be building towards a more efficient machine, because success will build on success. When people realize that, this is a better state than we were in several months before, they're also more likely to come to you with with further suggestions about how things can be improved even beyond that. And then you've got, this positive feedback loop again, but it's building on itself in a positive way rather than dragging you down towards the depths of bankruptcy. So some green and red flags to avoid, the green flags are the ones to look for, the red flags are the ones to avoid, as ways to kind of tell whether or not your systems are working. The red flags are going to mean that you still have system problems to solve. Things like, if your team is constantly asking what to do next, then your processes aren't clear enough. If you're involved in too many of those routine tasks, then there's some clarity needed. Whereas if or you need to delegate better, honestly. But green flag would be cases are moving predictably through the new process. If the team is regularly asking, what you need to do next, then the processes aren't clear enough. Green flag would be your team knows what to do without constant direction. If clients are calling multiple times for status updates, then you need to improve your communication systems and giving your clients those updates about things proactively rather than reactively. A good sort of standard to have is, depending on the practice area, some of these, won't work for everywhere, but monthly updates, for immigration. Yeah, okay, USCIS is going to sit on their hands for hours and weeks and days and months and possibly years. But a once a month email to your clients saying, no news, it's still in the same status with USCIS, we'll let you know, goes a huge way to them, feeling like you're taking care of them through that process. Alternately, this will also help you spend time, and all of your other attorney and paralegal staff spend time on legal work, and you won't be managing as much chaos because you're not having to worry about everybody, running around and trying to make sure that all the clients are handled. And then the red flag would be if staff is still working significant overtime on a regular basis. That means that the process still can be made further or made further, made more efficient, can be further bettered, where I was actually going with that sentence, or possibly you just need to hire more staff. And if that becomes a payroll issue, then you need to charge more. And a green flag would be if everybody has generally reasonable stress levels. There's always going to be one person who feels stressed at, anything, but there's only so much we can do about those people. But when cases are moving forward predictably and team members are knowing what to do, that's your kind of key sign that you've built good processes, because the green flags that we've got listed here are going to be those 4 key indicators that your systems are fundamentally working. I say we like there's anybody else doing this. It's just me and my cough syrup. But some common mistakes that I do see people making, starting with, don't try to fix everything at once. Like, it's so easy to just be like, oh my God, everything's horrible, let's scrap it all and start over. But then you're going to find yourself at square one. Everything is scrapped and we're starting over. And casework's going to pause for days or weeks or months before you can get everything running again. Just focus on one thing at a time. One step better every day, 1% better every day. By the time we get to the end of the year, we're 365% better than we were, at the start of the year. Maybe we take a few days off for Christmas, Thanksgiving, St. Swithin's Day, etc. So, okay, fine, 355 days, or 355%. But focus on one thing at a time, make one thing better at a time, and don't try to fix everything at once, because then you're going to get analysis paralysis and nothing's going to get better. Don't skip the time tracking step. I know that one's going to be probably the hardest to manage and the hardest to get honesty about, but it's also the one that is most critical in quantifying how much your business is actually losing without having to add any more staff. This is probably one where you will also encounter resistance from some of your staff, because they don't want to necessarily do more work. They enjoy their inefficient ways of working because it means a little more leisure time for them. But you have to ask them to be honest about where their time is being wasted and present it as a way of making things better for everybody within the firm. Also, don't ignore the small inefficiencies. Like, internally, even if it's something that only is 30 minutes of wasted time, 30 minutes across 100 matters per person per year, I mean, that's 50 hours. That's more than a week of loss for every employee, depending on how many billables you expect. But it could be even 2 weeks of lost time for every employee just because something takes 30 minutes longer than it should. I think I did that math right. If I didn't, fine, let me know in the comments. Also, make sure that you're asking clients what frustrated them, because ultimately, they're the ones that are paying you the money to do the legal work. They deserve to have their feedback heard. I am not going to say the client is always right, because they're not, but they should always be at least given the opportunity to express their frustrations, and also, what delighted them, because things that delighted them, you want to also do more of. Because again, that's how we get more referrals. That's how we get more business. That's how we make more money. And then finally, we don't want to blame individuals when systems fail. One of the things I say, I think more than anything else, is that as long as we learn from our failures, they're not failures, they're just mistakes, but we learn from them, we do better next time, and we move along, and we just keep testing and adjusting and making things better, making things more efficient. It's not always the easiest thing to think about, but it is something that we have to always, lead our organizations with a little bit more grace than we would necessarily expect everyone else to have, because that's how we build sustainable teams long term. So, wrapping up, next steps for, I say this week, but this is going out on Friday, so really this is more of a, actually, it's Friday. Just think about, pick one case type to analyze, map out the current process maybe over the weekend, at least as it exists in your head, and then on Monday, go gut check this with your team, get a little bit more insight, and then when you've done that, identify your top 3 chaos points. But don't try to fix anything yet. Just understand what's actually happening. Then next week, or at the start of whenever you've got the 3 next steps done, this really probably should go out on a Monday, but it's not going to. It's going to go out on a Friday, because, I'm having a bevy, and I feel like y'all should have a bevy with me. But this week, pick your one case type to analyze, map that current process, and then identify where the chaos points are. Gut check it with your, production team and your sales and intake team as relevant when you get back in the office on Monday. And then once you've done that, focus on that biggest problem. Calculate what it's costing you. Design a simple fix for that single biggest problem or bottleneck, and then test it on a few cases that come in throughout the week. Because taking this smaller but methodical approach will give you much better results than just trying to overhaul everything at once. There's that delightful / horrible aphorism about, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. How do you fix every problem that you have within your firm? One small step at a time. Pick a simple improvement, test it on a few new cases, and then see if it works. Then, when you're done, go back, pick the next chaos point. Design a simple improvement, test it on 2 or 3 new cases, roll it out. Just rinse and repeat until everything is tickety-boo. So, let's just finally wrap up, and I have definitely kept this under an hour, Jose. Let's wrap up with a few key points. Remember, the most of the chaos in your firm, in your practice, comes from systems problems, not people problems. We can fix most people. We can fix most systems too, but most people are doing what they think is the right thing. And if you can provide them with the guidance to understand that this is actually the right way to do it, they will become better employees. Most employees are not poor employees. They're just poorly guided. Small improvements are going to add up to big changes over time. It's the same principle as compounded interest. Make those small changes, pennies a day, become, guineas later on. You got to measure everything to make sure that, the improvements are working, because if you're not measuring it, it's just wishful thinking. Start with just one problem. If you only take one thing away from this about, all the implementation elements, just start with one problem and build from there, because once you've gotten one problem done, the next one will seem a lot easier to deal with by comparison. Because you got to remember, the goal is not to create perfect systems. We can't. Entropy is a thing. The inevitable heat death of the universe will come for us all. We cannot create a system that is perfectly efficient. It's just to create systems that work better than what you have now, and to make everyone's job easier, and to do that iteratively until we've got something that is helping you achieve the financial and the personal goals that you want, helping your employees stay satisfied at work, stay working for you for a long time, and helping your clients be delighted with the experiences that you're providing them, so that they refer you more clients, so that you make more money, and they feel like they've had a fantastic experience along the way. So your systems should, fundamentally just support good legal work, not get in the way of it. So start small, measure process, build on what works. Good luck implementing these changes in your practice. If we already work together and you're watching this, thank you. Shoot me an email with what you thought, and we can talk about it in our next consult. If you'd like to keep the conversation going and you found this through some other YouTube algorithm. Welcome. Fantastic. Thank you. You can reach me at lensler.photo@gmail. That's LENSLR. It was also at the front of the video. Or you can, comments are open. So love to hear from you. Thank you all for your time this evening, or whenever and wherever you are watching. And in the words of John Daly, not the golfer, I wish you all good night and a good tomorrow.